Aloha Sky Warriors, good afternoon and welcome from Foster's Point. Today we've got the honor of hosting General and Mrs. Wilsbach and Chief King with their visit to the 15th Wing. And as part of the visit, we wanted to have an all-call. Due to COVID, we couldn't have everybody in a small auditorium. So instead, we decided to shoot a virtual all-call, and we're going to stay here out at Foster's Point. And the plan is General Wilsbach has a few words he'd like to say, and then a lot of you have submitted questions that you'd like to ask the General, and so I'll be asking those on your behalf. So without further ado, General, sir, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Well, thanks, Dan. It's really great to be here. Chief King and I are just so honored to have an opportunity to spend some time with you. What a beautiful spot. Got a little Sound of Freedom going right now. So it's really fun to be here and be back with the 15th Wing. And as I thought I might just start off with a little bit about my background, and then I'm going to pass it to Chief King for a few words. But this is my 4th time here in Hawaii. I've had 2 assignments in PACAF and 2 assignments at Indo-PACOM, but it's my 9th assignment in the Indo-Pacific Theater. So I've had a number of assignments here in the theater, and I just love this part of the world and have a heart for it, so I'm really happy to be back. My wife and I are both from Florida. We both went to the University of Florida, and we're proud Gator fans. And we also love Labrador Retrievers, and we really like hospitality. And so you've been demonstrating such hospitality to us today, and we're really, really thankful for that. And really thankful for all of the service that the men and women of the 15th Wing execute every single day as a part of this base. And so it's just fun to be here and spend a little bit of time. And let me stop there as a way of introduction and pass it over to the Chief.
Yeah, so aloha. I am Chief Master Sergeant King. I am the Command First Sergeant for PACAF. And so I want to thank General Wilsbach. I am sitting in as the interim command chief right now. And so Chief Wolf, who's our new PACAF command chief, he will be on the island on Wednesday. So a little bit of background about me. I am from California. I am married with 2 kids. I have served in Japan, Korea as far as my PACAF background, and now I'm here in Hawaii. I am a medic by trade, so hoa to all 4 ends out there. I also served as a first sergeant for 7.5 years, so hoa to all first sergeants out there. And I will tell you, I am happy to be here, and the things that I love other than my family, I am a Los Angeles Lakers fan, so I'm pulling for them as well. And I would also say that for me, I like when our airmen and we are genuine. So I just encourage everybody just to be yourself. So that is all I have. So
all right, thanks, Chief. Well, to begin with, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that I'd like us as PACAF airmen to concentrate in the next couple of years. And the first one is to have our forces be ready and resilient. And there's a lot that goes into that. But we certainly have to be ready to compete with a near-peer competitor. And what I'm talking about there is China and to a lesser degree Russia, but certainly pertinent to us in the Asia-Pacific theater. The other part of that is the resiliency, and so we've talked a little bit about resiliency amongst the force, which is certainly important, but also the actual fighting units need to be resilient, as we have been asking them to do a lot over the course of the last few years. And so readiness and resiliency, not only as the people but the equipment as well, matters. And so we'll put some emphasis on that, which is really much more challenged in the age of COVID because it's just harder to do training. It's hard to get people together and be resilient, et cetera. So that'll be something that we'll be working on here as we go forward for the time being. The other thing that I really want us to concentrate on is working with allies and partners. And so I think of this really in simple terms. When you look at the list of people that want to be our allies and partners, it's a pretty long list. When you look at who our competitors have on their team, it's a pretty short list. So, North Korea, China, Russia, their allies, they don't have that many. And that's an advantage to us. But we've got to work more with our allies and partners so that whenever we do work together, It's relatively seamless and we're interoperable. In conjunction with our allies and partners, I also want to make sure that we're working in the joint team. So Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and now the space professionals with our new U.S. Space Force. But we have to be a part of the joint force, and so we're going to spend a lot of time making sure that we provide them with those core capabilities that we can provide as airmen, and that they're providing us what they can provide as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, as well as space professionals. And then lastly, and quite possibly the most important part of this, because if we don't have this part right, all the stuff that I talked about before doesn't really happen, and that is taking care of airmen and their families. Again, harder in the age of COVID, and especially when you think about how much isolation and alone time we have all had in the last 9 months because of COVID. Making sure that people are taken care of takes a lot more creativity, and it takes a lot more effort than just hosting a party at your house, which we can't do right now. So using technology like we're doing here, instead of doing an in-person all-call, we've got technology working for us. Well, you can do that by making video calls or phone calls to the folks that you work with and their families as well. And so I think those are the real 4 key areas that I wanted to talk about first off, and I'll pass it over back to the Chief for a few remarks about what she has in mind from the enlisted side of the house, and then I've got a couple of other things about way forward, and then Colonel Dowles, if you would hit us with the questions.
Thank you, General Wilsbach. So I will tell you, recently Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force Bass has just pushed out her priorities, and they are right in line with General Wilsbach has just said. So the first one of those being people. So we understand as the Air Force that you, our airmen, you guys are our most important priorities. And that isn't just a cliche that we say, but we recognize the importance of what you do. And so I would ask you guys, as we talk about people being a priority, that you guys also look out for your fellow airmen. And as far as, so it isn't just leadership job to care about people, it's also your job as airmen to care about your peers, your brethren, and to care about the leaders, above you and the people that you supervise. Second priority that she made one of her priorities is readiness. And so as we talk about readiness of the force, readiness of our equipment, readiness of your health, we just encourage you guys to think about readiness, and don't just put it in a little box. One of the things that just happened is that PT just has been extended till January. So I would encourage you guys to know that readiness also means, for you, making sure that your physical health is on par, your mental health is on par, you make sure that you guys are doing that family and balanced life. So readiness means so many different things. So I would encourage you guys to make sure that readiness is at the forefront. And next and finally, her last point is culture. So as an Air Force right now, there are so many things that we cannot forget about when it comes to our Air Force heritage, our history, and our culture of a force as airmen. So I would encourage you guys to ask the question. We just talked about Foster's Point and what it's being named after. So I would ask you guys, your base, what's the history of the base that you're at? Look at some of the streets on your base, and what are the names do those streets mean, and who was the airmen that those bases or their streets were named after? So that's important that we understand those as we talk about our culture and our history of the airmen that came before us.
Those are great words, Chief. Thanks. Well, as we go forward, a couple of other points that I'd like everybody to be thinking about. And the first, I've got to say thank you to everybody for the COVID-19 response. I've been very happy, not just here at Hickam with the response for airmen, but also at every base in PACAF. We've created a bubble on the base where we're almost disease-free. And the way that's happened is everybody's being compliant with the countermeasures. And so please accept my thanks for that, but keep doing it because we haven't beaten this disease yet. And hopefully in the near future we'll have a vaccine, but until then the countermeasures work, and it only takes one person, especially if they end up being a super spreader, to create havoc amongst our ranks. So keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to be fine. So thank you for that. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is innovation. And got a chance to go by the innovation cell here at the 15th Wing today, and they're doing fantastic work. But one of the things they told me is they actually need your ideas, and so don't stop providing those ideas, because there's hundreds, maybe thousands of great ideas out there, and Colonel Dobbles has money. I have money that we can put to those ideas and turn them into a reality that'll make us better airmen, provide better air power to our nation. And so these don't have to be earth-shattering innovations either. They can be little tweaks. And if you think about all 45,000 of us PACAF airmen that come in every day with a way to make just their part a little bit better is innovation. And at the end of a year, 45,000 times 200, which is nominally the number of days that we all work per year, we would reinvent ourselves as an organization with innovation. And so I'll say, keep doing innovation. And for the middle management, the middle leadership, don't squash the young airmen and the young officers. Let their ideas come through, because the senior leaders, like the ones that are sitting here in the chairs, we want to hear about those ideas because they're awesome ideas. So thank you for that. Maybe some of you have heard about General Brown's ideas, and he wrote a paper on it called Accelerate, Change, or Lose. I mean, it's so pertinent for us in the Pacific. And the gist, if you haven't had a chance to read the paper, is that we as a service must accelerate our getting better, positive change. And if we don't, we stand the chance of losing this competition that we're in with peer competitors such as China and Russia. And then the last piece, which is so incredibly important, that really became much more acute recently, is diversity, inclusion, and I also add belonging. And one of the reasons why I add belonging is because if you will think about any group that you've ever belonged to, and you knew you belonged to it and you felt like you belonged to it, there wasn't issues with whether the group had your best interest at heart. You knew it, and there wasn't ever any unlawful discrimination because they had your best interest at heart, and there wasn't any bias, and you were included. You knew you were included because you belonged, and I think that's really the foundation of what we need in every single one of our units. And if you're counting on your commander and your chief to make this happen, you might be disappointed, because certainly we need the chiefs and we need the commanders to be proponents and champions of this. But we need every single person working on this every single day. Listen, here's what I want. I want every airman in PACAF and their family members to be the best versions of themselves all the time. And if we have bias and we have discrimination that's unlawful in our ranks, they can't achieve that. And then we're not being the organization that we could be. And so with those four things, let me stop there, and we'll go to Colonel Dobbles and see if there are any questions for us, either myself or the chief. Thank you.
Sir, I've got questions.
All right, excellent.
These come from our airmen in the 15th Wing. This first one comes from the maintenance group, the MXS, and it's regarding strategic vision. With our footprint in Iraq and Afghanistan lessening and the tensions seemingly increasing in the South China Sea, it seems priorities have and will be shifting to PACOM. In what ways, if any, do you see this changing how we plan, prepare, partner, and exercise our basis support and contingency capes beyond the ACE concept?
Yeah, that's an amazingly great question from a maintainer in the maintenance group. So thank you for asking that. So you're exactly right. And in fact, the National Defense Strategy calls the Indo-Pacific Theater the priority theater. And so you're exactly right. You know, the numbers are being reduced in the Middle East and not necessarily increasing in the Pacific Theater, Indo-Pacific Theater, but that's a possibility. But what I think you can see is a more emphasis on competing with that near-peer competitor, namely China. But also we have to, just because we're competing with a near-peer competitor doesn't mean we can discount North Korea. And so we always have to be ready to fight tonight there. to begin with our forces that are on the peninsula, but also for the rest of the forces that are not only here in the Pacific, but also come in from CONUS to support that fight. And we have to be ready to be able to do that. With respect to basing, I don't think you're going to see a big change in our major bases in theater, but what you will see is this concept called Agile Combat Employment. And if you don't know what Agile Combat Employment is, I'll just make it really simple. It's basically adding additional places where you can land, rearm, and refuel. And the way that we would use those is they would be quite temporary. So you might stay there for a couple of days, you might only stay there for a couple hours, get some fuel, get some weapons, perhaps fix any minor maintenance issues, and take off again. And what this does is it really complicates our adversary's problem because they don't necessarily know where we are and they don't necessarily know where we're going. And so we're going to continue to flesh out this Agile Combat Employment ACE concept for PACAF. It's a lot different method of employment than what we have been used to in the past. And it takes multi-skilled airmen to do this. So you can't put an entire wing's worth of personnel on these small little bases. You got to take airmen with small footprint, maybe can get in on a C-17 or a C-130, and they've got to be able to do multiple skills when they're there, and they're only going to be there for a short amount of time. So it's a really a different way of employing, and it takes some additional training. So I think that you will see those things are going to be the main things that we will look for as we try to be as strategic as possible here in the Pacific Theater.
Thank you, General. So the next question comes from the operations group, and it's regarding COVID-19. As COVID restrictions continue to increase the burden on working parents who are attempting to manage school, childcare on most occasions, and the same level of office work while maintaining physical and mental fitness, what is your advice and opinion to commanders and supervisors as they navigate leadership during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question also. Let me give you the real short answer, and I'm actually going to turn to the chief here and see if she has some additional advice for us. But I'd say give people a break. If you're a supervisor or a commander and you realize, especially military, married to military, you have to give them some time off to take care of the family at home because somebody's got to be there. And especially with in places where the CDCs are closed, the schools are closed, and they're doing all online school, somebody's got to be at home. So you've got to take a break. And so this actually happened to me in my last job where my enlisted aide was married to another service member, and they had school-age kids. And so we put them both on half-day schedules. And so that's as an example. And guess what? When you do that, there's some mission degradation. I get it. But there are special times happening right now. And we have to be able to flex and take care of the people and take care of their families and make sure that we get the mission done to the best of our ability. But there'll be some costs. COVID has incurred some costs on us as a force. But we can prioritize those costs and where those costs are incurred. Maybe they're at the low end of the readiness spectrum, and the high end of the readiness spectrum is still retained. And I feel confident that we've done that. And so that would be my advice. What do you think, Chief?
Yes, no, so sir, I agree. I am mill to mill myself, and so husband is right now home with the kids, and so I would say one of the things is flexibility. We need to encourage our commanders and leaders to be flexible and to get out of the standard 5 days a week, 8-hour thinking. And so we have to rethink and rebrand and know that it is okay to telework, to allow people time off, and to let our airmen know that we value you and we take care of our families. And so just for me, sir, just looking at that and thinking about that, for some of the folks that's teleworking, is production still being done? You know what I mean? And how much is production is lost? And so I would just say be flexible. And there are so many different ways to lead. And sometimes giving that time off is leadership. It isn't always being at work 10, 12 hours a day. And so we need to just rethink and rebrand our leadership skills and be innovative for our airmen and creative solutions.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. Another question from the operations group. With advanced weaponry growing threats from China, do you envision Hickam as a strategic launching pad for future operations within the Pacific? And if so, in your opinion, what additional resources do you envision Hickam Airfield needing in terms of aircraft infrastructure, et cetera?
Yes, I do think that it's a launching pad. And in fact, we were talking about this very thing this morning with the Joint Base. Every single base in PACAF is a fighting position, and some are more forward than others. But if you look at the threat, they can all threaten every base in PACAF with weapon systems that they have. And so it's really important that we keep this in mind. And so base defense is one thing that we need to take very seriously to make sure that we can retain the facilities and the runways and the personnel can be safe so that we can continue to generate air power. From the standpoint of answering the question of what changes do I see with regard to perhaps aircraft, for the time being I don't see any big changes. From really those are short-term answer, or that's a short-term answer, but as we go forward, certainly we've seen new platforms that are coming online, like KC-46 and F-35, and perhaps some other newer aircraft could potentially make their way into the Pacific theater, but I don't see that happening necessarily much besides F-35 this year, but we have to be prepared to accelerate that change, like I talked about before. And so I would fully anticipate that there'll be new technology, and we've talked about aircraft here, but you can't forget about radar systems and surveillance systems that help us to have domain awareness all throughout the Indo-Pacific theater, comm systems that help us keep it all connected and networked, which is incredibly important with the way that we fight. In addition, bringing in space, and so since we've had a U.S. Space Force stand up this year, we're figuring out how does the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Space Force connect, because we're so, we really need each other, and almost everything that we do in the U.S. Air Force counts on assets that we have in space and cyber as well. And there's certainly the defense of our cyber networks is incredibly important because that helps us with the communications and with the networking, but also we can incur cyber effects. So offensive cyber effects are also very important for our adversaries to have to deal with, and just another one of the dilemmas that we can present them with. And so I ask that all airmen think air power, but when you think air power, bring in space and cyber as a part of that, because we can integrate those and really create havoc with an adversary that means to cause us harm.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think we probably have time for one more,
okay.
if we can. The question is, will it be one of your priorities to restructure theater training and theater exercises to prepare for a future high-end conflict against a peer adversary?
Short answer, yes. Of course. I mean, we've all heard it. You train like you fight, and many of us have been to the Middle East and have executed that combat, which is totally different than perhaps that near peer competitor conflict that could happen here in our theater. And so we've learned a lot of lessons in the last few decades about how to fight in the Middle East, and some of those lessons are transferable and some are not. And so what I would tell you is our exercises here in the Pacific definitely need to prepare us to be able to occasionally go to the CENTCOM AOR, like we have some people there right now, to execute that fight. The bulk of our work and the bulk of our exercises here in the Indo-Pacific should be toward that high-end fight that you spoke of in your question. And so certainly Red Flag Alaska is one like that. We just did an exercise both here in Hawaii as well as in Guam called Valiant Shield, high-end fight. So those exercises are really beneficial. And we need to bring our allies and partners with them and our joint partners in there because we all need to be interoperable. I mean, think about it. If we have our allies and partners and our joint partners, and we are all quite interoperable and quite proficient at the high-end fight, imagine the calculus that our adversaries have to do with the lack of combat experience that they have compared to what we have, which we're the most combat experienced Air Force we've ever been. When you take on that high-end training with the combat experience, there's a lot of capability, and it's intangible. I mean, you can't necessarily put a marker on the wall about how much that high-end training with the combat experience gets you, but I think intuitively we all know it gets you something.
Okay, sir. Well, I want to say thank you not only for your time and Mrs. Wilsbach's time visiting the wing, and Chief, you as well, but thank you for sharing your thoughts with our airmen today. I think they'll find this very beneficial, and look forward to the rest of the visit.
Oh, we're looking forward. Well, Chief, why don't you take us home, just a few final comments for the men and women of the 15th, and then I'll close us out.
All right, so I just want to say thank you so very much. The one thing I would like to pass on to everybody is that, number one, you matter. So don't ever think that you don't matter, because you do matter. And number two, do not underestimate the impact you have on others. All right, so sorry.
All right, thanks, Chief. Well, that's so true. You all do matter, and I care about you, and frankly, I love each and every one of you, and I'm so thankful for your dedication and your service and your sacrifice. Not only what you're doing, but your families. And you might have family here that's helping you serve, or you might have family back in the mainland that's helping you to serve. And I'm so appreciative of them as well. And so please pass along to them my thanks for their service, because they are serving. They're just not getting paid for it, and you are. But I'm so thankful for everybody. Dan, thanks so much for showing Cindy and me and the Chief around today. We're having a great day. I mean, it's a really good day spending it with airmen, and we're just having a great time. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate your questions, appreciate your time, but most importantly, thank you for being airmen in the greatest Air Force there's ever been.